So here's a little intro to my project. As I said, it's about automated game design. To those unfamiliar with the term, I'll explain shortly. I'm focusing on the generation of exploratory games, which put more of an aesthetic approach to their design rather than a rules and mechanics based approach. So what I'm basically trying to answer is, what if the definition of game were expanded to include more aesthetic focused experiences? How would AGD change that? And the reason I chose exploratory games is because, yeah, these sorts of experiences have been less researched compared to the sort of like ruler mechanic focused genres, platformers, RPGs, and the like. So let's get a bit into what automated game design is. AGD can be somewhat of an ambiguous term, as any sort of procedural content generation or PCG can be considered AGD in some way, but academics refer to AGD, it means whole game generation, mechanics, rules, aesthetics, sounds, levels, everything and anything you can think of within a game. So let's talk a little bit now about exploratory games. So you might not have heard it before, but I've created a definition which I think fits well. So they're games of which a main mechanic is to reveal one or more multiple narratives or themes through oral or visual observation, where a key interaction is traversal of the environment. These can include, but are not limited to, walking simulators and narrative-driven games like The Outer Worlds, where the goals aren't explicitly stated, and you're just basically meant to explore and find out about the world and the time loop you're stuck in. So here's another good example: Gone Home, game where you explore just to find out what happened to the protagonist family. Again, there's no explicitly stated goals. The player pieces the story together through notes and observing the environment. And another sort of classic example, Proteus, where you explore a procedurally generated island. Again, no explicit goals. There's not really an end to the game in the traditional sense, just exploration for exploration's sake. So, why even automate game design in the first place? The common argument is that AGD systems can maybe help reduce a developer workload and help with things like crunch. But personally, I think it's a little wishful thinking. As games become bigger and better, they require more resources. So automating some aspects of game design, or maybe all of it, would just cause developers and testers to spend more time on the other aspects. Or companies might just lay off workers until fewer devs have the same workload, therefore introducing crunch again. So another reason, which I'm more in favor for, is to empower the solo or indie developer. They might not have the resources bigger companies might have access to, so therefore automating even aspects of game design can help developers create a game prototype in weeks or days rather than the sort of months it might take them with little knowledge. So you can imagine a smaller dev running an AGD system in the background to build a small game prototype, which they can adjust by changing it or slapping new mechanics on top of. As stated, the overall goal of AGD is to assist developers, definitely not replace them. I don't think AI has the creative capabilities, or may never, to replace humans. So let's get a bit into some previous works in AGD. So first off is Mike Cook's Angelina, possibly the widest known AGD system. Cooperative coevolution is used to generate games. It designs all aspects of the game, levels, audio, rules, content layout, visuals, and it uses its own evaluation system called the face evaluation system, framing aesthetics, concepts, and examples. Different versions are used for different genres of games. So there's a version for platformers, a separate one for arcade style games, and so on. So, and the very first AGD system was Pell's Metagame, as created by Pell to generate games like Chinese chess, checkers, and shogi, so chess-like games. Games were generated using probability distributions for parameters of the game, including piece complexity, board size, and locality. The input to the generator was a predefined class of games provided and written by the user in a grammar, which the generator accepted. And evaluation wasn't performed by AI or playtesters, it was performed by strategic analysis by Pell himself. So Cameron Bound's Ludi is another good example of an AGD system for designing two-player combinatorial games. The Ludi game description language is used to define a tic-tac-toe and use an evolutionary algorithm to evolve games from that base game of tic-tac-toe. Games are evaluated using AI evaluations on game quality. They measure for depth, holding a lasting interest, clarity of the mechanics, drama, which means recovering from bad positions, and decisiveness. So how many moves into the game it would take for the winner to essentially be decided. So Trenner and colleagues created a system called the Game-O-Matic, which generates simple arcade-style games or news games. So interactive sketches that encourage journalists to think of news events as systems rather than stories. So the input is takes a list of objects, actors, and their relationships given by the users, and then micro-rhetorics and recipes representing a segment of gameplay within a video game that can be supported by a convincing meaning derivation are used to form the final game. So if we take a look at an example of the Game-O-Matic, so you use the concept map from, uh, from the left, and the aim of this game is to keep the hunger away from the man as long as possible while time makes more hunger and food attacks the hunger. So here's another example of a game created by an AGD system. This was created by a version of Angelina and entered into the game jam. Ludum Dare 28. I think it came around 500th about that, but it shows that an AI can effectively create a game and at least enter it to a game jam. So the aim of the game was to collect the boats and avoid the weird cult-like looking dudes. And you can go and play it by following the link. Ooh. So let's talk about game quality now. So game evaluation via quality metrics is a big part of AGD. So what does actually make a game high quality? So firstly, optimal difficulty is suggested. So nothing too hard or too easy, otherwise it won't be fun or you'll lose interest or become too anxious. It's based on Csikszentmihalyi's theory of flow. Um, though I'm not sure how it would apply to exploratory games, as there's not any traditional sense of difficulty in these types of experiences. Uncertainty was another metric suggested by Majek and Leader. Uh, Chess and soccer were used in experiments to demonstrate that players are more interested in a game where the information about the outcome is not clear until the end of the game, as opposed to a game where the outcome could be determined in a few moves. Yeah, so again, this was used the investigation consisted of using two-person zero-sum adversarial games. So exploratory games, as stated, are quite different. Very usually single player, no explicitly stated goals. But intuitively, I think uncertainty definitely would apply there. So another metric, immersion, one I'm sure you've heard plenty of times to describe games. It's quite an ambiguous term. No one's actually tried to define it formally, as far as I know, but Brown and Kers have suggested that breaking it down into three categories: engagement, the player investing time, effort, and attention into the game; engrossment, the player becoming further involved in the game; and total immersion, the player experiencing presence, so cut off from reality and detachment to such an extent that the game was all that mattered. And yeah, furthermore, Malone describes several heuristics for designing computer games. These include challenge, fantasy, curiosity, and combination of all these features. So the reason I mentioned this was a secondary research goal of mine is to explore if the aforementioned metrics can be used to determine the quality of generated exploratory games. You might be thinking the metrics such as optimal difficulty will be difficult to apply to something which is not really about getting to an end goal or has any inherent challenge in it. So yeah, and I'd be inclined to agree, but perhaps the others, such as uncertainty, immersion, and all that I mentioned, do. And in the context of aesthetic focused games, they haven't really been investigated. So why did I pick exploratory games specifically? So I think exploratory games offer some unique and interesting design challenges not really found in traditional rule-based games, such as object and asset placement for mood evocation, environmental storytelling, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I think it would be interesting. I think it's an interesting question as to how can we get an AI to design something like that. Also, automating exploratory game development not only has advantages for that specific genre, but could help designers, particularly for open world games or maybe even horror games, to evoke the sort of moods that they want. Um, yeah, also, as you've noticed, the majority of AGD systems don't really put aesthetics as a focus, but intuitively, I suspect that aesthetics, level design, art, and music do actually affect the player experience in a large way. And from what I've read, it hasn't been explored much, if at all, through AGD research. Uh, so this could help create more interesting environments for other genres of games, like I've said. And yeah, that's it really. Cool. Next slide. So here's a bit on what I'm planning to do. I have an initial AGD system in the works, just working on interesting environments for the player to traverse. So what if an AI could generate an environment that incited a sense of curiosity from the player to explore? So from this, I'll hopefully continue building on it and adding features and expanding the game space. But for now, it's just asset placement and so like landmarks that will be the main focus. So you can see a screenshot of a preliminary like environment. I actually developed this with the help of two students here, Michael Sagia and Alan Chitia, and the environments for now are being evaluated by some AI agents and some custom fitness functions, but eventually I would like to incorporate some like real life player evaluation just to see how people who actually play these games think of the environments generated. So yeah, here's another example of an environment generated. Again, it's currently a work in progress where it uses an evolutionary algorithm to again initial population of meshes and crossover and applies mutation for 100 generations, and all the assets are laid out using Poisson displacement. So cool. All right, thank you for listening to me. If you have any questions about this, feel free to contact me on my email or Twitter, and I'm also looking for a knowledge exchange or placement.